It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Jody Gangloff Kaufman, who serves as one of us associate directors, and she is the coordinator of community IPM in our program. Today, Jody will share insights about a project undertaken by the community IPM team in 2024 to evaluate mosquito bucket traps. Thank you, Jody.
Hey, thank you. Well, thanks everybody for taking the time to be here. I am not really talking about making a mosquito bucket trap, but the outcome of a project where we looked more closely at what was going on in mosquito bucket traps. So, just to let you know that, has it been a very wet year? We were just having a conversation about all the major downpours that people are experiencing, and this set of graphics is from May or June. So yeah, it's been a wet year. And what is it that mosquitoes need? They need water. So the mosquito life cycle, all mosquitoes have larvae that develop in water. The females will lay their eggs either on the water or very close to water on soil or something. And the larvae develop in water. They feed on microorganisms in the water, and then they pupate in the water close to the surface so the adult can emerge from the pupal case. And this happens, depending on the temperature, it can happen in as little as 7 days. So we have a lot of mosquitoes around, especially by this time of year. There are important vector mosquitoes. There are a lot more than these, but we chose to focus on these three species. That's Aedes albopictus, which is the Asian tiger mosquito, which is not statewide, but I'll explain that. And then Culex species, the Culex pipiens complex, includes a variety of northern, southern house mosquitoes and stuff. But that's your typical sort of morning and evening biting mosquito. And then there's just an interesting thing, Anopheles quadrimaculatus, which is capable of vectoring malaria. And, malaria used to be endemic in New York. It's no longer. So we have the mosquitoes, but we don't have the disease. So we decided to focus on these, well, Aedes and Culex, because they are the most common backyard mosquitoes. And, we ask, what can you do about backyard mosquitoes? We always tell people to dump standing water. Especially think about where water might be hiding that you can't see it, you're not looking at it. And that includes gutters and equipment or garbage, recycling, things like that. Little tiny pockets of water can breed both Aedes and Culex mosquitoes. So do that, but we also have repellents. Repellents are great. Wearing long sleeves or long pants is really not feasible in the summertime, even if you are just working outside. Using fans is another option, but that can, help when you're sitting and not so much when you're moving around. And then we have pesticides, right? So some people prefer to do it themselves. The pesticide application, is going to be a liquid. You can hire somebody to fog or to spray liquid. And the problem with DIY or professionally applied pesticides is that they're not specific to mosquitoes. They are general and they will kill everything, including all the bees, any flying insects, any crawling insects, whatever, in your yard. So we're looking at this. This is the bucket of doom, the mosquito bucket. And I'm asking you in the audience to chime in. Let us know if you've tried this. So I'm not saying anything new here to teach you about using the mosquito buckets, but there's no lack of advice on mosquito buckets on the internet. So everybody's sort of using them. And then there's the Homegrown National Park Mosquito Bucket Challenge. Now, this is a Doug Tallamy, Dr. Doug Tallamy, who is a very strong advocate for not backyard mosquitoes, but backyard insects. He wants to see people avoiding the fogging and instead using the mosquito bucket. And it works because it supposedly draws in mosquitoes and it doesn't affect other wildlife in your yard. So, we know this information is out there. First of all, let's talk about what a dunk is, just to refresh our memory. A mosquito dunk is a donut-shaped disc kind of material embedded with spores of Bacillus thuringiensis israeliensis, BTI. Now, Bacillus thuringiensis is a group of naturally occurring soil-dwelling bacteria that has been utilized in so many different ways for biocontrol efforts, including having those genes inserted into the crops themselves, BT corn and such. So on formation of the spore, which is the resting stage of a bacteria, a dry stage, this crystallized protein is produced, and that's what the little scanning electron microscope image is. Those are the little proteins, in fact. And these have insecticidal properties. And we know we have a variety of Bacillus thuringiensis, and they have different kinds of just slightly different toxins that are toxic against different insects. So the Israeliensis variety is the one that is toxic against aquatic developing flies, including black flies, but in this case, mosquitoes. Right? So we had questions about the mosquito bucket. First of all, are they effective? Do mosquito dunks work in this kind of a setting in a bucket? And also, do mosquitoes lay eggs in the buckets with BTI, or is it somehow repellent? Are they as likely to lay eggs in the bucket that is treated? Does it matter when you add the BTI? You know, could you just add it later on? You find mosquitoes breeding, can you just add it? And does that work? Which mosquitoes will oviposit in the bucket? That was a big one. We don't know what kind of mosquitoes we're killing unless we start, collecting them. How long does one setup last before it fails and begins to breed mosquitoes? That's an important point. And then how many per acre would you need to see a lower dip in the mosquito numbers? So we had a bunch of questions. We couldn't answer them all, but we set up this test, our mosquito bucket test. This map kind of represents the locations of our community IPM team members. So, straight across the state, Culex species mosquitoes are in everyone's backyards. So they are, statewide, region-wide, nationwide. So there's, different concentrations of them, but they are pretty much statewide. And I make this point because Aedes albopictus, the Asian tiger mosquito, is only found in the sort of downstate area of New York and south of there. So we had traps in an Aedes albopictus, Culex, region, and outside of that region to see if there were differences. Okay, our experimental design looked like this. Each site had 3 buckets that were half filled with water and left to sit for 2 days. If you're on municipal water, you have chlorine in the water. And so leaving it sit for 2 days allows the chlorine to off gas and then the experiment to begin. We added 7 grams, or basically a handful, of Timothy hay that was purchased. It's the kind of hay that you would feed to rabbits. And that was a way to standardize the way we were setting up our buckets. We pushed it down to soak it in. And in bucket 1, it was a control. You had nothing but water and the hay. In bucket 2, we did a pre-treatment. So we added the mosquito dunk on day 1 when the grass was added. And then the third treatment would be treated after 2 weeks, presumably after mosquito larvae are already developing. At 2 weeks post setup, as I just said, we're checking the buckets for mosquito eggs and larvae. We found larvae in the control and number 3. We found eggs on the surface of these buckets. And so we've confirmed that, at least they're laying eggs in the buckets that are treated, the bucket that's treated. We added at 2 weeks the mosquito dunk, the post-treatment to bucket 3. Okay. Now, this is the fun part, going back to collect the data. At 4 weeks post-setup, we return to the buckets with these nets. These nets are actually mosquito nets for your head. And so if you put on a hat and put this over your head and cinch it around your neck or your shoulders, you can keep mosquitoes from biting your face and such. And they just happen to fit perfectly around the neck of a bucket. So we were able to shoo away any flying mosquitoes, any resting mosquitoes near the buckets, and then attach the net to the top of the bucket, and then also attach a string to the foliage above, because we put the buckets into shady areas, presumably underneath vegetation and whatnot, and creating a cone. And after 24 to 48 hours, we would check the nets for adult mosquitoes. You tap the bucket, get them flying, and then pop the net off, cinch the bottom, label, and place into a freezer. So what we wanted to do is see if we're catching mosquitoes coming out of all 3 buckets and what species we have. We didn't quantify anything because, well, we did between the treatment and the control, but you'll see what I mean in a sec. So then the mosquitoes were counted and identified over the winter, and you can see they're pretty uniform. This is all from one sample, but this sample had 200 some odd, and they're all pretty much the same. So here are our astounding results. We had 6 different people using 8 different sites, and we found the most consistent results I couldn't imagine. I didn't even do statistics on it because we had no emergence from the pre-treat or the post-treat buckets. Kind of confirms that this method works, right? We had some inconsistencies among the controls and how many emerged, but that has to do with local environmental, conditions and things. So, yeah, the question's answered. Are mosquitoes laying eggs in the control and the treated buckets? And we confirmed, yes, eggs and larvae were confirmed in control and treated buckets. We didn't necessarily find larvae, but we found like this egg raft in the treated buckets. So we know that mosquitoes are laying eggs, and those are Culex eggs, by the way. Does adding the BTI mosquito dunk prevent adult emergence? Clearly it does. The treated buckets had no adult emergence, and these are 6 or 8 different sites, 6 different scientists, and we all had the same results. Which species are emerging from the control buckets? It was actually mainly Culex in the Culex pipiens kind of complex. Only one Aedes albopictus, that Asian tiger mosquito, was caught in the Asian tiger mosquito region specifically in Babylon in one of my buckets. So the majority we have Culex, not Aedes. That's an interesting thing because the Aedes mosquitoes will lay their eggs in exactly that same environment. But not answered in this test was how long does the setup last before the treated buckets fail? How many per acre to suppress mosquitoes? And why no tiger mosquitoes? Why didn't we catch any in the 3, buckets, the 3 replications that happened in Aedes territory? So we went to others' experiences because obviously there's a ton of information about mosquito buckets. And the consensus and the recommendation from Homegrown National Parks was to refresh them at 30 days or so. We don't want these things to be breeding mosquitoes, and we want people to take care of them. Don't forget about it. But it'll start to smell, so you'll know. And then how many mosquito buckets are recommended per area? The consensus again was about 4 to 5 of these per acre, but it really depends. It's really variable because your mosquito population might have way more mosquitoes because there's a wetland near you or whatever. The vegetation, other standing water, and environmental conditions will all change, the number of mosquitoes that you have. So at least 1 to 2 per yard, right? Per typical yard. Why didn't we catch tiger mosquitoes? I've been going over this. It's possible that, I don't know, they desiccated in the net before we could get them and fell back in the water or something. Or maybe it's because the setup isn't quite enough of an odor attractant for them. And I say that only because I went to look for what attracts Aedes mosquitoes, Aedes albopictus, and there are a lot of experiments out there looking at better odors. So I'm not quite sure why we didn't catch Aedes mosquitoes. We should have. That'll be another thing to answer. What are the drawbacks of a mosquito bucket? It's really like mainly one type of mosquito laid eggs in the buckets. It's the mosquitoes that bite at dawn and dusk, not the day biting mosquito, the Asian tiger mosquito. The bucket traps have to be maintained to avoid breeding more mosquitoes. The curious wildlife may tip it over. We had that happen. Raccoons will get into these, so it's maybe good to secure them. Rainfall can cause overflow, and the bucket traps might be unsightly or smelly, so you want to put them definitely out of the way wherever people are not going to be. But the advantages of these traps is that it's cheap and it's easy to use. You don't even need a whole dunk to put in the bucket. You can put a quarter of a piece in there or get the granules and use a few of those. It's biocontrol, it's widely available. There's little or no risk to people. There's no risk to wildlife, except potentially, drowning in the bucket. We'll talk about that. It's no risk to non-target insects. In fact, honeybees love dirty water and they will come and drink from this. and no problem with water quality or anything. And it does prevent mosquito emergence. In that 24 to 48 hours, we had almost 700 mosquitoes that were not well in the control buckets that did not emerge from the treated buckets, right? So we prevented some mosquito emergence. So here are some best practices. It's recommended to use a black bucket because mosquitoes are drawn to the dark color, and black is just better. You want to off-gas that chlorine if you have municipal water. Use clean organic matter. We use the hay for, rabbits. Use dry leaves, but don't use highly decomposed stuff or compost or soil, because BT is a bacteria. It's living, and it has to compete with other bacteria in the water, especially to be eaten by the mosquitoes. So we want it to be like the dominant bacteria in the water. Place your buckets in a shady area. Prepare to refresh them monthly. Cover them with chicken wire if you have small animals as a concern. Somebody out there online said they found a drowned chipmunk, so we don't want that to happen. Add a stick as a ladder. Another thing I saw on the internet was that someone had tadpoles in their bucket, which is great, right? So they needed a stick to let the frogs get out. But the tadpoles can do just as good a job at eating the mosquito larvae as BT for killing them. And then use multiple buckets per acre. So yeah, that's my talk. And I hope that, that helps someone out there. But I think we have time for questions, right?
Thank you, Jody. That was a great presentation and very interesting results. And yes, we do have a few questions in the chat box. Beth is asking standing water, bird baths, rain barrels.
Mm-hmm. Yes, bird baths and rain barrels. I've seen people put, window screen over a rain barrel to prevent mosquitoes from getting in. But you definitely should put a dunk inside a rain barrel, because somehow mosquitoes will get in. They're like water. So bird bath as well. The birds don't care. BT does not harm them. So, and what I've seen, as I mentioned before, is that beekeepers will often put a bucket out with floating things for their bees to drink, and that is also safe. It's BTI is safe for bees. Can cooking oil, I have the questions up as well. Cooking oil be used versus BTI? Presuming that you're going to coat the surface of the water with oil, depends on what you want to do. If you're doing a mosquito bucket trap to have mosquitoes lay eggs and have larvae that never develop, you don't want to use cooking oil because they won't smell the water and they won't lay their eggs there. But if you're talking about some other, water that you need to have around or something like that, yeah, oil can be used to prevent mosquito access to the water, but I wouldn't use it in a mosquito bucket. So where do you get mosquito buckets? The next question. That's simply a bucket. You can go to Home Depot and buy a bucket. And you can also buy the mosquito dunks at any hardware store as well. So a bucket costs about $5. I don't know how much the dunks cost, maybe $8 for 6 of them, and it'll last you all season. Oh, and I see Joellen answered the question.
Yeah, I'm
Can
gonna
you
pick and then we'll answer this in the YouTube playlist. So there is a question related to, I heard that BTI will also kill off a dragonfly larvae. Is this true?
Not to my knowledge. BTI is very specific to flies, and that's why we're using that variety. I will double check just to make sure that's not the case.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Jody, and thank you everyone for the questions. Keep putting those questions in the chat box. As I mentioned, we will answer all of those and they will be posted in our YouTube playlist. Now, moving on, we're transitioning to our IPM minute, and we have our next speaker, which takes a quick look at a timely topic and provides some action items you can take in the weeks ahead before our next What's Bugging You First Fridays. So for this segment, I'd like to introduce Dr. Betsy Lamb. She is the ornamental IPM coordinator in our program. Today, Betsy is providing the second step in our 8-step series on feeding friendly insects with a focus on picking the right plants. Thank you, Betsy, for joining us today.
Thank you, Alejandro. Oops, I'm getting things out of the way so I can actually read my own slides. And you will notice, so this is step 2 of the Feeding Friendly Insects series. And you'll notice there's a QR code here if you're interested in seeing all the information we have on our website relative to this. And I believe that it will also be in the chat if you're not a QR code sort of person. And now we will make sure that we can advance. How about that? So just to sort of look at the whole series of the 8 steps, last time they did the planning the soil preparation step, and we're on number 2, so you've got 6 more to go. And so it is a process to get all the to get the plants that you want and have it work well for beneficial insects, but it's not difficult. All right, so what do friendly insects want? We're talking about feeding friendly insects, and so obviously they want food, but also shelter and some kind of protection to protect them from other insects, because almost everything has something that will feed on it, and maybe even protect them if you're using pesticides in part of your yard that you've got what's considered a refuge. But we're going to talk about which plants to get this time. So the goal, and when you're choosing plants, is to provide food, shelter, and protection for a variety of insects and over the whole period that you would have beneficial insects out there. So what we're looking for are plants that have lots of pollen and nectar. We want season-long flowers across all of the plants that you have planted in your yard, or even your neighbor's yard. We'll take that in. And then a variety of flower shapes and sizes and grasses. People don't think of grass flowers. You're like, well, grass flowers, those aren't pollinated and they don't really have the same kind of pollen. It's wind pollinated. But what we're looking for in grasses is often more the protection and sometimes the overwintering, where you'll see insects that survive through the winter in grass stems. And you can also go on that website. You can find information about when to clearing out your garden to actually protect some of those beneficial insects that are living in plant parts that you could leave over the winter. I put this picture of a Queen Lanslace in here because it reminds me to talk about flower size. A lot of the beneficials that we have are very, very small, including a lot of the native bees. And so they like small flowers. It also gives you more pollen and more nectar over the whole flower, and gives you often a longer flowering period for that flower. But almost any kind of flower will work. So what kinds of plants are best? There are almost no rules. If you look at something that we now see things like goldenrod that has no pollen, or some other things that are specific that don't have pollen. Well, if you're trying to feed pollen feeding insects, then that's probably not a good one to choose. But so that's where the almost comes in. But plants can be annuals or perennials, doesn't matter. They can be native or non-native, it doesn't matter. Choosing what is of importance to you, that's the basic line, and something that you like or you want to have in your yard, that's also important. And weeds count, like that Queen Anne's lace that I showed you. Flowering weeds count. So weedy edges are actually good for you in terms of keeping your beneficial insects there. Again, if you want to look, including, sorry, on our website through the QR code or the link in the chat, there are several lists of plant materials and places you can find plant materials based on your location, from Xerxes, plant materials that we put together, looking at flowering times across the season to help you get a full season flowering. And so all sorts of information that you can find on that site. And that's what I have. So let's see if there's questions that relate to my stuff.
Yeah, there is a question. What is the difference between shelter and protection? Really
so shelter could be even it's raining and you've got a very small insect in it. It's going to come in under the leaves to be protected from the rain. Shelter, I'm not sure that there's totally a difference. In many cases, you could think of things as being one or both. If you're looking at protection through the winter, so something that's going to live in a plant stem, maybe that's more protection from cold weather. But they're pretty similar.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to see you next month. Have a great weekend and enjoy the rest of the summer. Thank you.